Hi, I'm Trevor Conquergood. Welcome to this week's RNK Software Club's video of the week. And the topic for this week is going to be about making changes to the size of your designs. And I know that people love to take the designs that they collect and, take parts of designs and use them to make new designs. And inevitably, we want to change the size of our designs. And so I thought I would share some tips and tricks about that. And this particular design that's on my screen is one of the new designs that was made for the FTCU owners. Will get this in the November 2020, free designs of the month. And so if you go ahead and open up this design, what you'll find out is that there's a beautiful sort of wheat sheath that's above and below the word harvest. And I thought you might want to take just the wheat sheath and use it somewhere else, and so you might try and, drag a box around it to select it. And the only thing is, whenever I do that, I always seem to get part of the word harvest. And so I know there's lots of ways to just select what you want. But I love the lasso tool for that. Just here on the left, I have a lasso selection. And then basically I can click and click and click to draw the actual selection box. And so it's easy to kind of go around the wheat sheet that I want and not the word harvest. And then when I right click, it selects whatever is in that little lasso shape. So now I've got the part of the design that I would like to use somewhere else. And I just simply kind of click on copy and then start up a new workspace. And that way we can paste the design in there, and we aren't going to affect the one that we started with at all. It'll still be, as it always was. So we'll paste it in there. And now we have a new copy of the design and you could work with it. And so I thought, people might want to make it smaller. And generally speaking, I guess there's bigger and there's smaller, right? With designs, you could go both directions. And there's things that might happen. There's no correct amount that you can go. Sometimes you can only go a little bit bigger and smaller before you run into problems. Sometimes you can go a lot bigger and smaller without any problems. And so some of the things that you're going to run into are things like, are the stitches getting too small or too big? So as you change the size, and if you look at this design, you'll know, what I kind of zero in on is the wheat sheaths kind of have really fat spots and really thin spots, and that actually makes it a little bit challenging because you can only get so thin in the thin spots before it won't sew well. And so let's just measure them to see how thin they really are, and I'll zoom in to get nice and close on that, and then take a ruler and click and drag to measure it. And it says it's 1.3 millimeters. Now you can do that in inches if you like, but I find the really small measurements sometimes are easier in metric because, it's numbers like 1 and 1.5 and 2. This says 0.06 of an inch. Anyway, I know when I do it in metric that anything more than 1 millimeter is long enough to be a reasonable satin column. The reality is my needle is, the needles are almost a millimeter wide, and when they go into the fabric, they make a hole. And if you don't move kind of at least a whole millimeter before you try and make the next hole, then the stitch really just falls into the same hole that it just came out of. And it doesn't really sew very well. And so that's kind of the minimum. And this is a little bit, this is 1.3. And what I'm telling you is at 1.3, you can get a good satin column. At 1.5, even better. And, certainly machines love certain stitch lengths like 2 and 3 millimeter columns. But here's a column that also gets fatter, right? This one's 9 millimeters in its fat spot. And that's why you can see that we used a satin split. So it's satin stitch only up until a certain distance, until it gets too long, and then it starts to split it a little bit, and it gives a nice look. And for the wheat sheath, for the wheat, it seems just like the perfect appearance for it. But now you want to make it smaller, so you select all that stuff, and you use whatever method you want to make it smaller. But I'll go to my properties box and just come and say, right now it's 6 inches wide. If I made it 4 inches wide, what would happen? And so I click apply and it gets smaller and I take a closer look. And so right away I'm kind of going, okay, well, how's it going in the small spots, right? Because I don't want it to get too skinny in the small spots. And so where it kind of looks skinniest right about there. And so again, to be really accurate, if you turn off the 3D, and then maybe even turn on the stitch points, see how you can see, nice and clearly where you're measuring from. And then I'll just measure from here to there and see, well, it's only 0.8 of a millimeter now at kind of the skinniest of spots. And so I want to do something about that because I'm not sure that that'll sew well any longer. And it's easy to fix that because all you have to do is I'll just select the whole design and do it for every shape. It's here in your properties box where it says push-pull compensation, this little purple zigzag. When I go on there, notice that I've already got 0.2 of a millimeter pull compensation. And so we're going to need to have more than that because we're at 0.8 and this adds it to both sides. So for example, if I made this 0.3, that would add another 0.1 on one side and another 0.1 on the other. In other words, it's like adding another 0.2 to the total shape. And so my 0.8 would become 1. So what I'm saying is maybe just going to 0.3 instead of 0.2 would be enough to make it sew better. And and that said, it wouldn't be wrong to go to 0.4 and really just fatten it up. And I don't know if you can detect that when I did that, but you can actually see it happening, getting just this. It's just kind of like fattening things up a little bit. But now if I take the ruler and kind of measure in the skinny spots, we're getting back to that 1.2, it's going to sew better at that size. So a lot of times going smaller, that's a simple fix, just maybe needing to add a little bit of pull compensation on your skinny parts. The other thing I might consider is the underlay, because I know that when I made these, that because they were so thick and thin, I like to use for underlay a parallel and a contour. But because there's so much of this shape that's in that really thin column, it's kind of optional to use the contour, and turning it off, as much as it's nice to have here in this fatter area, out here in the thinner area, you'll really notice the difference when there's simply one layer of zigzag and then the satin column comes over top. Because what happens is with the contour is it'll end up walking out to the end and then back again and then zigzagging out and then satining back on top. And so it has several plies out here in the skinny areas. And so what I'm telling you is when you're getting really skinny satin columns, sometimes having less underlay is actually better than having more. And because what will happen is the column won't even be able to cover the underlay. If you ever have that where you're sewing and you start to see some of that underlay kind of almost peeking out of the column, then you know that you need to take that column and add even more pull compensation. And it just simply extends the points outwards. So that would be the big thing going smaller, underlay and stitch length. Once you kind of get it all tweaked up. I guess the other thing I could talk about is, because now I'm really noticing it when I turn the 3D back on, it's the splits, right? Because at the bigger size, like when in the original size, it seemed really natural because there were splits on all of the shapes. But now at the smaller size, only some of the shapes are getting splits and some are not. And so you kind of you can control that also from the properties box. Now, I guess two ways to control it. One is you could actually go in on these and adjust their stitch directions. So if I select it and go into my shape tool and I change the direction of the stitch to be kind of more directly across the shape, then I'm going to get, it'll be less distance across, so less chance of it splitting, and I guess there's still just a little bit of a split left on it. But the other thing you can do is you can come in here and change the maximum from 6 to, let's say, 7. And then that says it's allowed to go 7 before it needs to split. And that, therefore, I bet if I select the whole design and just changed it to 7 or 8 even, I would just get rid of all the splits. And that wouldn't be wrong either, if you're doing a nice, table decoration, centerpiece or something like that, and you just want it to be all the nice sort of smooth sewing satin and no splits, that's fine. But it could be the opposite, right? You might be going to sew it on a judo karate gi, and you want to make sure that the satins aren't getting too long because you don't want them to ever come apart and get damaged. And so there's reasons why we choose, I guess, different kinds. At this point, it would look great to, kind of take it and maybe hit it with your circle template tool and create some kind of a unique, layout for the, how you're going to do it. But while we're talking about size changes, you could also kind of go the opposite way, right? And so I'm just going to undo that. Select this and say, what if we were making it bigger, instead of smaller? And it's really kind of the same kind of questions that you run into, which is, at this new size, are the stitch types that were used still appropriate? And now on this one now, I noticed that because it was a satin with splits, it still looks pretty good, even at 10 inches, That said, you can select this and you can come in here and say, well, maybe I want to do more splits instead of an 8, I could turn that down to 5, and you'll see kind of like it'll give a bit more of a texture to it. So still a split, but not as long of splits. And of course, you can always select these and just change the type from a satin to be a pattern fill. If you go to like a pattern number 1, it'll make it look nice and smooth. So now if you're going onto the back of a karate gi, you could do a nice smooth, very durable stitch style. Or maybe something a little more dramatic with some sort of texture in it, like a snake skin. Or you could go to a fancy fill altogether. But I think that you see what I'm talking about. So you're changing this type of stitch. And that's really the main things is at the new sizes, do you like the type of stitch that was used at the original, or do you want to make changes to it? So I hope that was kind of an interesting video for you guys, changing the sizes of your designs, and some of the tips and tricks that you might want to consider when you do. So until next time, I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you so much for listening, and bye for now.